Ukraine on air, and we are again here to deliver you recent news from Ukraine, from the heart of the Europe. Here is Nick Starkov. Good evening. And traditionally, we begin with a summary of the Russian Federation's losses suffered during this war against Ukraine. This is what Russian Federation calls a special military operation. Now you see total enemy combat losses from the 24th of February. As estimated, the death range is over 17,000 people, more than almost 600 units of tanks, and more than 1,700 units of armored combat vehicles. Also, you see the losses among artillery systems, multiple rocket launchers, air defense means, aircraft and helicopters and different aircrafts, namely 127 and 129 units. Motor vehicles, ships, boats and fuel tanks, unmanned aerial vehicles and special equipment. Also, I have to say again, and this is our usual note, that the calculation of these data is being constantly revised. The thing is that this is a high intensity of combat, shelling, fightings, fightings in Ukraine. The Russian military losses, it's a quite difficult topic to count and calculate, but there are some analytics, some experts in the world who analyze this information and can provide the verified count. So my colleague Zhenya Mikhin looked into it and see the story.
Ukraine seized more than 730 units of Russian equipment. Such data were published by the Oryx researchers. They analyze open sources and collect data on the Russian invasion in Ukraine. These investigators take into account only those facts that are documented in photos or videos. They analyzed, for example, how many tanks each of the sides lost. According to the researchers, the Ukrainians already destroyed about 135 Russian tanks. Another trophy were 133 heavy armored vehicles. At the same time, the Ukrainian army lost 79 tanks. If you take the 133 vehicles seized by Ukraine and subtract the 79 ones they lost, it turns out that the Ukrainian army was replenished with 54 tanks. Among them, for example, both the old Soviet T-64 tanks and the latest Russian T-91s. In this video you can see a combat vehicle T-80. It was captured by the Ukrainian military, received new insignia and already participates in the fights against the invaders. The video was posted on social media on March 11th. In the recording, the Ukrainian military says that it was not the only equipment they captured during the day. On that field, there were 2 tanks, 3 self-propelled howitzers, a heavy flamethrower system, 2 multi-purpose armored towing vehicles, 2 fuel trucks. Among the equipment seized by the Ukrainians are many pieces from the Soviet times. The same is true for the Ukrainian army. This gives an advantage. The equipment is clear in usage and can be repaired and used against the invaders. Among these, for example, are tanks T-64 and T-72, self-propelled artillery installations Gvozdika, Akatsiya, MSTA, BTR-80 armored personnel carriers and BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles, BM-21 Grad and BM-27 Hurricane multiple rocket launchers. But there are also purely Russian weapons and equipment. Perhaps the most valuable, anti-aircraft missile systems Panzer C-1. One costs about $14 million. Same money would buy you 5 Russian T-90 tanks. Ukrainians are even encouraged to destroy and seize enemy equipment. For example, in early March, the mayor of Chernihiv, the city which was surrounded by Russians and shelled by heavy artillery and aircraft, personally promised a bounty on the invaders. Vladislav Atroshenko stated that he would pay $5,000 in hryvnia equivalent for each destroyed Russian armored personnel carrier, more than $6,500 for an infantry fighting vehicle, and more than $8,000 for a tank. The Ukroboronprom concern went even further. Its representatives said that they would give $1 million to a Russian pilot who decides to surrender the plane to Ukraine. The Russians have not yet surrendered the planes, but there have been cases when they voluntarily donated the equipment. Advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Viktor Andrusev, told one such story. He wrote, Russian tankman Mikhail decided to surrender and also give away the tank he was driving. He was detained by Ukrainian special services. Now the Russian soldier will be paid $10,000 after the war and given the opportunity to apply for Ukrainian citizenship. In total, according to the Oryx researchers, Russia already lost about 2,000 units of equipment in Ukraine. It is destroyed, abandoned and captured by Ukrainians. And this is only what was discovered in the photos and videos. At the same time, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Kremlin troops lost about 4,000 units of equipment in just 1 month of hostilities.
Ребята, спасибо вам большое.
Correspondents of our channel are reporting directly from the all hotspots of Ukraine daily and nightly, and even at that moment when the shelling is ongoing, the blasts can be heard. One of our correspondents, Anastasia Volkova, right now, today, she's in the city of Severodonetsk. At the minute when she recorded her video for us, a missile struck a neighboring house. Now you can see the video by your own eyes.
Сейчас вы можете слышать, как боевики.
Now you can hear Russian troops targeting residential areas of Severodonetsk from aircraft. Today is March 29th on the calendar. The shelling continues. Russian troops continue shelling civilians targeting residential buildings. There was an air raid yesterday. Now it looks like something like an air raid or heavy artillery too. I will only be able to say for sure after the shelling is over, when I can go out and assess the damage to the city. Russian troops deliberately shelling civilian infrastructure, wanting to kill people here, destroy the city and turn it into ruins. This is all being done by Russian troops, and they're shelling my house, my neighborhood specifically right now. And it's not military infrastructure, it's residential infrastructure that's being hit.
34 days. This is the number of days of the when Ukraine is defending itself against the Russian aggression. Russian Federation continues shelling Ukrainian houses and first of all civilian infrastructure, even though it states that it's waging a so-called special military operation and hits only the military objects. This is completely not true, and why you will see right now in our following story.
Luhansk region was hit by the invaders all night long. They deliberately shelled residential areas in Severodonetsk, Rubizhne, Popasna, Lysychansk and Novotoshkovsky. Major fires broke out there. Fire in Lysychansk swept 5 houses at once. A foresty complex also caught fire in the Severodonetsk community. Rescuers are still extinguishing the fires. Russian troops are attacking residential quarters in Mykolaiv as well. Several strikes were launched yesterday afternoon. In the morning, a residential building and the building of the regional state administration were hit by Russian shelling. It was destroyed from the 1st to the 9th floors. Rescuers pulled 9 victims out from under the debris.
Развалили полздания.
They destroyed half of the building, they hit my office, the bastards. As for the people, as for the victims, we all walk before God. Most of them get out, it's unclear how they escaped. Now 8 civilians remain under debris, we hope to get them out, we're searching for them. More than 100 came out, 50, 100 let's say so. Also we're searching for 3 military.
The consequences of the attack on the oil depot in the Rivne region continue to be eliminated today. The night before, a Russian missile hit it. The State Emergency Service reports that there is no leak of oil products outside the base and no danger to the population, no casualties and victims.
The chemical and radiation levels are normal. The laboratories of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine and the Rivne Laboratory Center have already checked. The health of citizens is not in danger.
A Russian missile also hit an oil depot in Lutsk on Sunday night. The fire was only extinguished by yesterday morning.
На превеликий жаль, ті запаси пального, які
Unfortunately, the fuel stocks were burnt out, and the oil depot was seriously damaged. The state emergency service workers managed to extinguish the fire for many hours. Thanks to them for this really difficult and titanic work, for extinguishing it.
Enemy attacks on Kharkiv also continue. The Zhukovsky National Airspace University was damaged by the shelling. A man walking nearby was injured. Since the full-scale Russian offensive in the city, almost 1,200 multi-story buildings, 53 kindergartens, 69 schools and 15 hospitals have already been destroyed.
Я продолжаю настойчиво просить вас.
I continue to urge you to use the shelters, especially at night, when our enemy is bombing our city Kharkiv with particular fierceness. Our army is doing everything possible, sometimes even impossible, to destroy the aggressor.
Also today, the consequences of yesterday's shelling of the town of Lubotin, where 7 private houses were burned at once, are being eliminated. The body of a man was removed from the debris of one of the houses. 2 more people were rescued. Enemy attacks on Mariupol also do not stop. According to local authorities, almost 5,000 people have already been killed there since February the 24th. 150,000 residents have been evacuated. Another 170,000 remain trapped. Nearly 2,500 apartment buildings, 90% of the total number, have been damaged because of the shelling. Meanwhile, in the Kyiv region, Ukrainian military continue to counterattack. Irpin has been completely liberated. A cleanup operation is currently underway. City Mayor Alexander Markushin urged residents not to return to their homes for a while.
В Ірпінь повертатися поки що не можна.
It is impossible to return to Irpin. It's still dangerous. We are strengthening our new positions and will go on to liberate Bucha, Hostomel and Warzel. We understand that our city will be attacked again, and we will defend it bravely.
The defenders also liberated several villages in Kherson region, on the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. The minimum distance from the enemy forces to Kryvyi Rih 40 kilometers now, compared to 10 kilometers before.
Враг уже не просто остановлен по всем направлениям.
The enemy is not just stopped in all directions, but has already been pushed back, far away from the outskirts of the city. The contact line is not on the border with Dnipropetrovsk region anymore, it is already the Kherson region. Our military is showing serious courage and causing serious damage to enemy.
Over the past day, the Ukrainian army destroyed 8 enemy aircrafts, 3 helicopters, 4 drones and 2 cruise missiles. According to the General Staff, enemy losses amounted to 17,200 personnel. Reported by Natalia Voloshina, Pavlo Stelmach, UATV News.
And now, while we are waiting for our next special guest, I just want to present you a recent breaking news that is known from the Istanbul, where the next round of talks between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations concluded. Now we know that it concluded with the draft of the probable treaty between Ukraine and Russia. And now we are here with our first guest, and this will be our topic of the discussion. This is Vadim Halaychuk, First Deputy Chair of the Parliament Committee of Ukraine on the Integration in the European Union. And greetings, Pane Vadim.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us too. So you probably know that right now the main part of the negotiation process is ongoing in online and offline versions. The negotiator from the Russian side, Vladimir Medinsky, stated that the ongoing stage of the negotiations signals to the de-escalation. Is it so? And my first question to you is whether what he said, is the current stage really is a signal for a de-escalation or not?
First of all, as Ukraine had made very clear in a number of times, in a number of circumstances, that we are looking for mutually accepted positions in the negotiations to end this war that is killing hundreds, thousands of civilians and destroying our country and our economy. And therefore, the efforts that Ukrainian delegation is making are unprecedented to get the Russian side to negotiate more or less real positions, let me put it that way. Because after the first negotiation that happened in Belarus, we were very disappointed with how little the Russian side understood what's going on in Ukraine and what in reality is happening and what negotiation positions could be. I can only confirm that at this point, we do see the desire of the parties to get to mutually accepted positions, let's put it that way. However, we do not understand yet what Russian party positions are on the most important points. We do not hear anymore those completely ungrounded accusations and demands about the denazifications of Ukraine. We do not hear anymore about the need to demilitarize Ukraine. So it's a huge progress. And the statement that the Russian party had made today about their willingness to negotiate the status of Crimea, their willingness to negotiate the status of the occupied territories under certain circumstances, and the most important, their willingness to negotiate something close to ceasefire, at least in some of the fronts. And they particularly named the vicinities, the Kyiv and the Kyiv region vicinities. Although, according to some reports, we understand that the potential of the Russian troops that have been gathered around Kyiv, especially in the Irpin and Bucha regions, the city of Irpin had been liberated. The city of Bucha will be liberated in a few days. The morale is low among the Russian troops. The attacking potential is very low. So it's quite possible that the Russian side, understanding that they're incapable of any serious offensive on the Kyiv front, they are trying to present it as their willingness to negotiate and their willingness to show some movement towards bringing the positions closer. However, again,
Mr. Vadim,
the Ukrainian side made it very clear that any sort of de-escalation is very welcome, and we will be moving closer to get these positions aligned.
So here you've just mentioned that Russian forces suffered great losses in Kyiv region. And this exactly was the thing that was yesterday stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in his evening statement. And we know today, we hear that one of the outcomes of the ongoing talks in Istanbul is that allegedly both parties are going to lower the intensity of the fightings in Kyiv and Chernihiv region. Isn't this just the next, just another one attempt by the Russian Federation to somehow justify its losses, its actual losses on the battle?
Well, as I said, the feedback from our negotiation team was that they were really surprised by how the Russian side was not prepared, let's put it that way, in terms of understanding what's going on in Ukraine. Therefore, it's difficult for us to assess all those statements that the Russians have made, how grounded they are and what the real intentions are. However, in the case of Kyiv region and Chernihiv region, where we have seen Russian side taking great losses, And where we have seen a very interesting development in the later days, we're getting reports from the military that Russians did manage to rotate their military units that are participating in the attacks on Kyiv and Chernihiv. And when the fresh forces entered, and after they've seen hundreds of different machinery being burned by Ukrainian troops, we know about the problem where Russians refused to pick up the bodies of their fallen soldiers and transport it back to Russia. Those images did not serve as a good motivation for even the fresh troops entering in. So it's quite possible that because of those losses, because of the activities that Ukrainian military had been performing in the later days, the Russian side realizes that offensive at the current state has pretty much come to an end, and we doubt that very much that they have the potential to develop the attack. Therefore, again, it's difficult for us to interpret what exactly the Russian side means when they make these statements. However, this particular statement that they're going to de-escalate, we welcome, because any de-escalation is welcome. However, it might be due to those very simple reasons where we understand that they lost any attacking potential in the Kyiv region and Chernihiv region military or war theater.
And before I'm going to deliver a next question to you, I suggest to see what the official delegation heads, representatives stated on the topic of the today's talks. Right now, the statement, the address by our Representative Mikhail Podolyak. He is an advisor to the head of the Office of the President.
The implementation of the decision of the Treaty on Security Guarantees will follow this pattern. First, it will be a referendum in which all citizens of Ukraine will express their position on this treaty, on how it should work. After that, it will be ratified by the parliaments of guarantor states and the Ukrainian parliament. This is the key point. In other words, we must have public support so that this treaty could be really consolidating for us.
Also, according to Mr. Podolyak, the separate paragraph of the treaty is proposed to fix the position of Ukraine and Russia to hold bilateral talks on the status of Crimea and Sevastopol for the next 15 years. Also, the issue of non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions will be discussed. And another thing is that also being suggested, according to the head of the delegation, Mr. Arachamia, is that Ukraine suggests that the treaty should also include an effective mechanism of interaction between guarantor countries. And this should be something similar to the well-known, renowned Article 5 from the NATO treaty alliance that states that any attack on a member state of the alliance is equal to attack to the whole alliance. So here we are on our next question. What will be the guarantee for Ukraine that this ever happen, and who will be the guarantor?
Ukraine's position is very clear. We will not allow for the Budapest Memorandum 2, so to speak, to again happen to Ukraine. The reality is such that after this war, undeclared, unprecedented by the level of the attack, it's become very clear, not just for us, for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, but for the whole European continent, that the existing security system is not functioning properly. Therefore, we're very clear about what it is that we want. We want very concrete guarantees from the countries that are members of the Security Council of the UN, and those countries are also members of NATO. We understand the situation right now where we cannot hope to become a member of NATO in anytime soon. However, we do understand that when a NATO country becomes a guarantor under this new agreement, and as a guarantor, it would have to act in the case Ukraine is attacked again, then besides the obligations that will be undertaken by these countries in this new arrangement and new agreement, the same Article 5 of the NATO statute will go into force for those countries that become the guarantees under this new agreement for Ukraine. Therefore, we think that this would be a very strong, legally strong mechanism to avoid what happened when we signed the Budapest Memorandum, when we had the so-called assurances instead of guarantees and any sort of mechanism to provide real guarantees and real protection. We will have this very vivid mechanism, both legal, political, diplomatic, and hopefully military, where we will have exactly written down the obligations as to what happens and when, in case Ukraine comes under threat of attack or is attacked again. And David Arachamia made it very clear that, for example, closing of the skies in case of a military aggression would be in the agreement. That would be a very, very concrete guarantee that we will require in order for Ukraine to enter any sort of this new security agreement, security arrangement.
Mr. Vadim, thank you very much for being with us here in studio. And I just have to move over and over in this in our today's broadcast. But thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you again in our next broadcasts. And also, you've just seen the statement delivered by the head of one of the representatives of Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul. And I want to show you also another one. This is the statement delivered by the head of the Russian Federation delegation.
The negotiations with the Ukrainian side were constructive. We received a proposal from Ukraine for consideration. Their position on inclusion in the treaty was clearly formulated. Their proposals will be considered in the near future and reported to the President, and there will be a corresponding response from us. For my part, I can say that we are also taking 2 steps to de-escalate the conflict.
And we welcome here our next guest. This is Jason J. Smart, political scientist and political advisor, US-based in Washington, D.C. My greetings to you, Mr. Jason.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. And so we've just had a discussion with one of the experts about the ongoing negotiation process between Russian and Ukrainian sides in Istanbul. They just recently concluded with some serious step forward. Should we call it a step forward? What's your stand on it?
I think that the United States and what Anthony Blinken has said is very clear, which is there are no real signs from the Russian part that they want to really make peace. And it's very hard. Russia historically, as you well enough know, typically goes through things like peace talks specifically to distract from what they're going to do next. They might be just buying time or seeking to find a way to now set up a larger attack in a different area. However, there is always the hope that Russia is being an honest broker and is in good faith operating to bring an end to this conflict.
Russia is always trying to trick everyone, even in the current negotiations. We know it's very well because they don't even call the ongoing hostilities a war, which is really a war. They call it a military operation. At the same time, the next question is sanctions. In its recent address in the Danish Parliament, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky stated that basically he appealed to the West with what can be shortly said, don't lift the sanctions pressure from Russia. And the question is if the ongoing negotiations will ever conclude with some sort of a treaty, how will West react on this?
For the sanctions, there's several different reasons the sanctions are there. One is that obviously it's a corrective thing. We hope that Russia corrects itself and gets out of Ukraine. But also there is, in the specific case of these sanctions, the recent sanctions, it's to penalize Russia. I mean, Russia needs to be punished for what it's done. And it needs to be done in such a way that it hurts Russia. And for the long term, that Russia, specifically Vladimir Putin, reconsiders when he wants to do something like attack a foreign country. It's terrible what's happened in Ukraine. And the only way to prevent that is to make it hurt so badly that Putin realizes that this is not in his interest, it is not in Russia's interest, and that the Russian people realize that what Putin is doing to their country is in fact destroying it. He is in no way representing Russian national interest. He's in fact destroying Russia's national interest.
But whether the Russian people understand this or not, this is an open question. And this is one of the main topics we all the time talk with our guests. So the question now is not even in the responsibility, but in the question is how to bring Putin and the Kremlin representatives to this responsibility, to make them accountable for what they made in Ukraine. And talking about the negotiation process, we just have two mechanisms right now: sanctions and something that can be decided on the talks and may be included into the treaty. How do you think? Do we still have the opportunity to bring Putin to justice?
It's going to be very hard to bring Putin himself to justice, obviously. Though I think that it's going to be quite necessary after this conflict to prosecute a lot of the people, Russian soldiers and so forth, who have been captured, who committed crimes against humanity or other war crimes, and these people must be punished. I mean, they violated international law, and what is international law? What is the purpose of having it if it's not enforced? And so it is necessary to punish them. How Russia will react to that, I assume, will be very, very negatively. And that's why my forecast is that this will be a very long-term conflict. It is not so simple as just Russia leaves Ukraine or Crimea comes back. There's a lot of questions we have to deal with here. What are we going to do with the sanctions? It's a great question. What are we going to do with all the war criminals? How are we going to prosecute them? What's Russia going to do if we prosecute its citizens? What are we going to do with the millions of Ukrainians who now have Russian passports from places such as Crimea or Donbass? This is a long-term problem. It's going to take a while to figure out and to work through. It is a very complex issue. But increasingly, it's clear that Vladimir Putin is a threat to world security, and more must be done to put pressure specifically on him and his circle to make them rethink their strategy and to really reconsider whether they wish to play the sort of role of the nemesis, which they're currently playing, in world affairs.
Just overnightly, Ukrainian president stated that there will be now a special group of experts in Ukraine established to somehow analyze the sanctions pressure. And the main thing by the president, he stated that Russia may somehow bypass the restrictions imposed by the West. I just propose you and our audience to see our next story, saying about how now sanctions are effective in Russia, and let's just watch it.
Да выйдите вы из склада!
What are you doing in someone else's cart for?
Get out of the stockroom.
Why are you taking from her? Where to go? They take everything from me.
There are hundreds of such videos in the internet over the past month. Since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, store shelves in the aggressor country have emptied, and a long-forgotten term from the 90s is coming back into use: shortage. Russian citizens are fighting not only for food, but also for kitchen utensils. In general, the list of scarce commodities in Russia is lasting, from personal hygiene items to various spare parts. After all, almost 4,400 restrictions were imposed against the Russian Federation in course of the past month of war in Ukraine. Almost half of the aggressor's total foreign exchange reserves, amounting to about $300 billion, have also been frozen. Moreover, the Central Bank of Russia has imposed restrictions on the exchange and circulation of foreign currency. Banks are banned to sell foreign currency in cash until September 9. While it may be sold in exchange for rubles, also Russian citizens will be able to withdraw only dollars from deposit accounts and only up to 10,000. The rest of the money will be available in rubles at the rate on the day of withdrawal. As a result, the haste at the ATMs is not less intensive than the customer queues for sugar in the stores. At the same time, Russian experts do not yet note mass unemployment. It amounts to 5%, which is not critical. However, the situation may turn not in favor of the aggressor's economy. After all, it is not easy to predict how many facilities will be shut down without foreign equipment subject to sanctions.
Not only the current activities of companies are subject to sanctions, but also their investment equipment. The current environment, for example, an unfortunate breakdown of some machine tool can stop the whole assembly line, moreover for an indefinite time, if the spare part has not already been imported. Because it is possible that the spare part for this machine is under sanctions and cannot be imported according to official channels.
Due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, more than 450 foreign companies have left or partially reduced their presence in the Russian market. Annual inflation has accelerated to 14.5%, and this is not the limit for the economic decline.
Inflation in the country will be high and it could easily reach 50%, so we will understand this at the end of the year. Sanctions on high technology, export technology, this is something we don't know clearly how it works until we will see it ourselves, because the Russian economy does not have systems that are completely based on Russian cogs. There will always be one foreign cog somewhere, and now, when the foreign technology is prohibited and we cannot predict what falls first. This will be more clear following the results of the second quarter, which will be entirely characterized by a recession in the economy, and it will be quite deep, somewhere on the level of the spring of 2020.
However, it is not worth expecting social activity from Russians angered by the shortage of food, Russian opposition journalists state, because active citizens who do not support Putin's regime have left the country. As of March 20, 14,000 Russian citizens arrived in Turkey, more than 30,000 in Georgia, and more than 6,000 in Armenia. Those who stayed are agreed to abide.
The Russian will always have just enough for a pack of buckwheat. Does he need more? As practice shows, there is, I don't know if it is a majority or not, but indeed a large group of people in Russia who would rather say, we endured 2014 sanctions when the dollar doubled, so we will be with these sanctions too. So it is always the same: when people have nothing to eat, a vegetable garden appears, and when people have nothing to drink, a moonshine machine appears.
Meanwhile, the US is preparing new sanctions to limit the aggressor's capabilities in the military sphere. The supply of technology to the Russian army will be cut off. Military manufacturers in Russia will be denied access to computer chips made in the West. Reported by Nick Starkov, Larissa Zubenko, Roman Smoler for UATV News.
And we're here back with our guest, Jason J. Smart, political scientist and advisor. And what we've just seen in our story is more probably about the collective, the issue of the collective responsibility from Russia, and should they ever be responsible for what Putin's do or not? This is always the open question. But what for me is more interesting is where the actual red line comes, and when Russia crosses it, how West should react. And another question is, if Russia would somehow, what Russia may do to to make the sanctions pressure revised and declined?
So I think that in the sanctions, there's several different aspects here. And we can look at the immediate ones, such as shortages of sugar or whatever it is, common commodities. The more long-term one, which this news broadcast mentioned, is what we should be looking for. This is where we're going to actually see big changes. I mean, people can live without sugar. But when there is not parts for manufacturing, for cars, for airplanes, and there's no way to replace those parts, you have a serious problem then. I mean, all of a sudden, the delivery of any good becomes impossible if there's no parts. If you're not able to buy things for Japanese cars, German cars, American cars, or trucks, what do? Even Lada, a huge amount of the pieces and parts for a Lada are produced outside of Russia. There's going to be serious problems, systematic problems throughout Russia with the supply chain. More to that effect, the military also is forced to buy products in the foreign market. They do not produce them in Russia. And so this is going to deteriorate the quality of the overall Russian military. But more to that extreme, I think that the downturn of the Russian economy is only expected to be about 7 to 12% of GDP. By contrast, though it's not clear yet, it looks like the Ukrainian downturn of the economy will be about 35 to 65% of GDP. So Ukraine is still suffering much more than Russia is due to these events. Now, that being said, I think that there is still a very good opportunity to punish Russia in other ways. Sanctions, historically, as you know, do not work in countries. I give you an example. The United States has been sanctioning the governments of Venezuela, Iran, North Korea for years, and it has not achieved the results we want. The leadership of those countries live very well. They live very high qualities of life, whereas the common people, the common citizens, are the ones that suffer. And that's why there is a strong argument that sanctions are not enough. Sanctions should motivate the people to blame the government, to turn against their government, but if it doesn't achieve that result and the people just suffer, does it really serve a purpose? We wish to create political change. And the way that you create political change is for the people, the common people in those countries, to realize that their lives are worsening specifically due to the actions of their government, and to seek a new government or seek a political change that would force political change, which would allow their country to return to normal trade and normal position in the international community.
So what is that leverage that would actually affect the Russian leadership? Is it the should be the battleground when Ukrainian forces win, or should it be the negotiation table? And talking about the sanctions pressure on the ordinary people, if you would ask an ordinary, usual Ukrainian would definitely say that this is Russian who voted for Putin, and he's also responsible. But the question is still how to achieve the result. And I'm not. If the sanctions don't have the sufficient result, what else can be done?
The best thing that can be done is a staggering military defeat of Russia. If Russia is crushed and is unable to achieve its objectives in Ukraine, this would be the worst thing that could happen to Vladimir Putin. I mean, how can he justify to his citizens a war which, yes, there's a lot of suffering in Ukraine, but within Russia, okay, they feel the sanctions. But if they feel that they are suffering these sanctions not for a good cause or not for Russia's security, but in fact lose the war, or in fact suffer such mass casualties, so many soldiers' deaths, and such a loss for nothing, I think this would be tragic for Putin. I think this would create a lot of problems, and that's what we want. We want Putin to suffer. I mean, ultimately, as long as Vladimir Putin stays in power, he will present a risk to global security and global stability. Vladimir Putin is ultimately the person who we must seek to force from power. And that's why I think the United States and other countries now is supporting Ukraine a lot, which is correct, the right thing to do. But we must think a little bit more strategically long-term. How do we prevent this from happening again? And I think the best way to prevent this from happening again is to more actively support the Russian opposition, the democratic opposition in Russia, to Vladimir Putin, to help the Russian population to learn more of what's really going on in the world, through the programs that we already have, such as Voice of America or Current Time, and to use these sorts of instruments to inform the Russian population of the truth. We want the Russian population to become sick of Putin and to go against him. As long as there's strong support for Putin, and as long as Putin is in power, I have no reason to believe that 6 months after there's a peace deal with Ukraine, that Putin will not invade the country again. The only way to prevent this from happening again is by removing Putin from power.
So we hope that this will happen once, and better sooner than later. Thank you very much, Mr. Jason J. Smart, political scientist and political advisor. This is the person who was just with us here in our studio, and I say thank you very much again, and see you next in our next broadcasts. And we already here in our studio have another one guest, and we're going to come back to the question, the main breaking news for today, a negotiation topic with our next guest, and this is Alvydas Medalinskas, a politician, Lithuanian politician and public figure. He served as he served as the deputy of Lithuanian Parliament, chief foreign policy advisor to Lithuanian president, and the head of the Foreign Policy Center in Vilnius. My greetings to you, Mr. Alvydas.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So our today's main topic is the ongoing negotiation, its possible impact on the situation in Ukraine. So what's my first question to you? What's your stand on the ongoing situation, and in the context of today's news, what we know now that the possible treaty, maybe it's drafted already, and maybe soon on the table?
Well, this is some kind of second round of positive news coming from this Russian war, which Russia started against Ukraine. The first good news, of course, we've been also intertwined with these casualties, but the first good news was that Ukraine resisted. And even when not just people in Russia, not politicians in Russia, but even some politicians in Western countries did not believe that that's possible. So Ukraine showed really how it's possible to concentrate all efforts of nation, not just army, but also the people, and to really to repulse Russian military and do not allow them to come more deeper to the Ukrainian territory. And Russia did not have too many really victories and too much results to show for the president of Russia. The second good news, I mean, it says that Russia is already lowering demands towards Ukraine. And of course, we understand why Russia could take away all those demands from denazification, because there are now Nazis in Ukraine. So wherefore, if there are no Nazis, so of course Putin will be very happy to explain for his people in Russia that there are no Nazis already. But of course, I mean, such Nazis did not exist in Ukraine. The rest, of course, it's up to the Ukraine to take a decision. Do accept if, of course, we believe all this information was coming up, first of all, from Financial Times and now from the comments of Ukraine. Would Ukraine be ready to accept status of neutrality? Of course, I understand it's not like a neutrality on Finlandization level. But of course, we see also these demands, and I think the right demands of the Ukrainian side, that Ukraine would be accepted to the European Union. So wherefore, if to go on this parallel way, I think it's no less important to talk to the European partners, that Ukraine would get the very clear guarantees that Ukraine will be the member of European Union. What to do with the already occupied before the Crimea territory and Donbass territory, which was cut off from Ukraine by Russia's decision to recognize so-called Donetsk People Republic and Luhansk People Republic. This, again, another matter, but of course also it's a question what to do with the territories what Russia occupied now during this war. And as far as I understand, Ukraine's position is quite clear that those territories have to be returned to Ukraine.
So yeah, you know, the question that I wanted to ask you is now sounds a little bit like a historical issue. Just overnight, like in his address, Volodymyr Zelensky posed a really interesting question. Isn't the Western rhetoric was miscalculation? We all remember very well that before the war started, Western countries, they tried to somehow persuade Russia with its threats of new and more with stronger sanctions, but saying that should Russia invade Ukraine, sanctions will come. And what we've seen, this actual Russian invasion happened. So the question is, wasn't this position and this rhetoric just a miscalculation? And taking into account these, should we make some conclusions for tomorrow?
Well, again, for tomorrow, for day after tomorrow, for the longer period of time, nobody knows how long those negotiations might go on. And nobody knows what will be the Russian actions. To my understanding, one of the reasons why Russia lowered her position in the negotiations is that Russia wants to concentrate on Donbass and on so-called corridor between Crimea and Donbass. And Russia do not have enough military forces to take away from whatever other territories, or from Russia, or from the territories close to Russia, let's say from the Caucasus or from Central Asia or whatever, because there are challenges on all those places to Russia. So I myself did not expect really that Russia will decide to take away military forces, let's say, from the borders with China, because also Russia sometimes called China strategic partner, but nevertheless, Russia kept the biggest military forces on the border with China, not on the western, let's say, flank of Russia. So now, of course, if, let's say, the negotiations go that way, that Russia is lowering her demands to Ukraine, then it's really important question that such issue of the corridor, so-called corridor, cannot exist, and all those military actions what Russia did in the territory under control of Kiev, they really have to be regarded such as occupation which have to be terminated after those negotiations. Now, coming back to a question about the Western position, I think, yes, Western countries miscalculated maybe because it was a position not to provoke Russia. I myself was in the position that even last April, Western countries could introduce, and I urged to do that, Iranian-style sanctions against Russia. And what is quite similar came up now when Russia started the real war. But then on April, the deputy chief of the president administration of Russia, Mr. Kozak, threatened to annihilate Ukraine. And I said that only two countries before did that thing. One of them was Israel regarding against Iran, and one North Korea against South Korea. So Russia came to the, let's say, camp, let's talk about it, to such kind of countries. And we have, of course, deserved much serious economical sanctions than we were before. Secondly, of course, Western countries had to organize military assistance delivery since last April in very active form. And again, I myself urged to do that. Unfortunately, those deliveries started later. So because of that, unfortunately, well, if such serious action would be taken in April and military deliveries, serious military delivery would start also in April, then of course I believe that we would be possible to save much more lives of the people, including in the army and also civilian people. But situation is like it is. What I also would like to see, of course, what I'm saying, negotiation going on between Russia and Ukraine, it's also solution of the situation in those war zones and occupied territories, and regarding those people who want to leave the territory and who have to be saved from those war zones and not to be deported to Russia. What's happening, unfortunately, in Mariupol, because I know quite many friends of mine in Mariupol and other places in Donbass, and we're telling the story. So there are many, many other issues which have to be discussed during negotiations. But first of all, we have not to forget one thing. For the Russian diplomats and for Russian politicians, concessions that mean weakness of the country. So wherefore, whatever negotiations going on, whatever discussion going on, it have to reach also very strong results. And I see quite strong proposals in Ukraine position. So let's say if those positions would be accepted by Russia, and if Western community, Western also countries, would join in the process with the supportive actions towards Ukraine, then I hope really that this nightmare, what we saw in Ukraine when Russia started the war, maybe, who knows, maybe the miracle come up and maybe it might come to close. But of course, I'm not sure still.
Probably nobody can be sure of what is going to be sooner or later in the hands of the Russian leadership and politicians. But I'd like to share this optimistic way of thinking, actually. And thank you very much, Mr. Alvydas Medalinskas, for excuse me for this little mistake. Thank you for being. Thank you for being with us. This was a Lithuanian politician and public figure, former deputy of Lithuanian Parliament, chief foreign policy advisor to the Lithuanian Parliament in 1996-2003, and head of the Foreign Policy Center in Vilnius. And now I want to present you our next, and this will be our last story for today, how peaceful citizens resist to the occupiers, invaders' tanks, and staying barehanded in front of tanks, and amid occupiers shooting. On the power of Ukrainian rear, my colleague Valeria Nikipelova will follow this story.
Despite the ban imposed by the occupiers on rallies, it's been a month now since residents of Kherson started fighting for their right to remain a part of Ukraine. Peacefully amid the blasts of shooting and gas grenade explosions, the idea of a pseudo-referendum and the creation of the so-called KNR did not pass here either, all thanks to brave civilians. These are Ukrainian tractor drivers, and now they have their own anti-aircraft gun. This is not the first time farmers snatched up enemy vehicles using their machinery. For example, tractor drivers from the Sumy region pocketed a self-propelled demining machine UR-77 abandoned by the invaders. Farmers from the Dnipropetrovsk region cleaned the fields from enemy scrap metal using agricultural equipment. And the story about gypsies who stole a tank from Russians near Kakhovka has become truly legendary. For every cunning Russian tank, there is a Ukrainian tractor driver, Ukrainian fighters say. And the absence of special military equipment or weaponry makes no obstacle.
Wanting to stop the enemy is a natural, intuitive reaction. Even if he doesn't have any weapons, he will come out nevertheless. If there is nothing he can do, he is ready to stand in front of this tank. And we have seen these cases many times. This is just a great desire not to let the enemy into your house, because the enemy defiles this house.
Such fierce resistance of ordinary Ukrainians made Russians not just surprised, their spirit has broken greatly. They got crushed morally.
The Russian military and political command had been informed that Ukraine would meet invaders with flowers and joy, but we see no flowers and no joy. One Russian soldier was saying that there is nothing like in Syria, but much worse in Ukraine. We want to leave. We do not want to be here. So it certainly affects psychologically the mood of the troops that entered Ukraine, the occupation troops.
Thus, instead of gifts, flowers and sweets, the occupying army receives piles of crumpled metal and thousands of casualties among the personnel. The country's leadership, in turn, urges the Ukrainians to continue to show the Russians that no one had been waiting for them in Ukraine. Reported by Marina Stepanenko, Valeria Nekipelova, UATV News.
This was our last cast, and I just want now to say thank you to our audience. First of all, thank you for your activity, for your comments, shares, for being so active in our chat. Our team sees how supportive you are in your activity. We just don't always have enough time to answer all your questions and all your propositions and very supportive messages in social medias. So thank you again. Stay with us and see you tomorrow.